Hello, and welcome to the Sleep Science Podcast. I'm Penny Lewis, a neuroscientist specializing in sleep and memory, and the presenter of this show. In the podcast, we talk about all things related to sleep, from dreaming and sleepwalking to what sleep does for our brain and body, and how we can get more out of our sleep. Please see our Sleep Science web pages for details. Today, we have two guests, Professor Tore Nielsen from the University of Montreal and Professor Mark Blagrove from Swansea University. Because this interview was particularly long and fascinating, we've broken it into two parts. In this first part, we talk about our guests' work on dreams and discuss what people dream about and how this can be measured in sleep experiments. We also talk about nightmares and fear extinction theory, which proposes that we dream about our fears in order to make them less frightening. We finish up with a discussion of the sensitivity theory, which suggests that more sensitive people have more nightmares when stressed. In part 2, which is coming soon, we'll move on to discuss the potential positives and negatives that may come with lucid dreaming, as well as work on the dream lag effect, a phenomena in which memories are incorporated into dreams on the night after they happen, and also around 6 to 7 days later, but not in between. We'll talk about why this odd gap in dream incorporation happens and what it might mean for memory. I hope you'll enjoy our conversation. Welcome to both of you, Tore Nielsen and Mark Blagrove, to the Sleep Science Podcast.
Well, thank you, Penny. It's nice to be here.
Yep, thank you, Penny. It's nice to be here too.
So let's jump in with some questions. So you both work on dreams, amongst other things. And I thought maybe we could start by finding out a little bit about each of you and how you got interested in this topic.
I got interested in dreaming because when I had just finished my undergraduate degree, I was lent a book by a friend of mine who was also graduating called The Innocence of Dreams. And it was by a psychoanalyst. And the psychoanalyst's view was that dreams, rather than disguising people's motivations or wishes or anything, depicted in a very innocent way how people were seeing the world. And so that was quite an amazing book. This person was a very rebel psychoanalyst to come up with such a view. And so because of that, I decided to do a PhD on dreaming.
Okay, fantastic. How about you, Tore?
Well, my backstory, it really starts when I was about 3, when I think I had my first dream, and it was a very vivid one. Witches at the window of my bedroom, threatening to carry me away on a spaceship. And ever since then, I've had a vivid, variable dream life that I've been trying to understand. And I guess it was only when I reached university level and I met other people who had interest in dreams and who informed me that this was actually an area of study that my antennae started to perk up, and I started looking actually for a place to study dreams. That was, I guess, as an undergraduate. It wasn't until I reached grad school that I found an actual functioning dream lab in Edmonton, run by Don Kuiken, who was looking for someone. And yeah, it was a big coincidence that we met up, but it was, very fortunate for me. And ever since, I haven't stopped. I've been studying dreams ever since I was a master's student in psychology. So.
And how do you go about studying dreams?
Okay, well, to continue, I guess it follows naturally that you need a laboratory, at least. Well, no, you don't need a laboratory. There are a lot of people who study dreams simply by collecting reports from the couch in a psychotherapist's office or at home from a dream diary, or using some kind of online app, to record dreams. But since the 50s, the gold standard has been a sleep laboratory where we do polysomnography. And the person sleeps in the lab, and we detect different stages of sleep, different events going on in the body, and wake people up according to those different events, and ask them what they were dreaming, and then do a systematic recording of the dream and analysis of the dream, or analysis of the relationship between the dream and what physiological events were taking place just before we woke the person up. That's how I've structured my particular dream science, but I'm aware that there are many ways to do dream science.
Maybe Mark can add to that.
Yes, some of my early work before I had a sleep laboratory, one of my main investigations were what type of people have lots of nightmares and what type of people have lots of lucid dreams. And so you can do various investigations of that just by finding out whether people report that they have many nightmares or many lucid dreams. So you get a retrospective measure of how many of those particular types of dreams people have. And after that, I developed the sleep lab, which, like Tore's sleep lab, you can wake people up in REM sleep or non-REM sleep and do many different types of experiments from the dream reports that you get then. And we also have diary records of dreams, so we can get people to record dreams at home for, say, 2 weeks. And some of the major work we've been doing is getting them to keep a daily diary as well and relating the contents of the dreams to the daily diaries. So there's very many ways that you can do proper, very rigorous experiments on dreaming.
So you've started to talk about the contents of dreams here, and I'm very curious to know more about this. Can you, both of you, maybe tell a bit about what kinds of contents you expect to find in dreams in terms of, senses, smell, touch, taste, speech, mathematical problem solving? I don't know. What do people do in their dreams?
I guess dreams are at base a kind of a simulation of our waking state. We tend to dream as if we were, ambulating through a world that's structured very much like the world that we live in. 1G gravity. There's a perceptual up and down, and we interact with the objects of our environment in a very normal way. We interact with other people in a very socially normal way. This is kind of the prevailing view of what dream content is right now. It's a simulation of our reality. But there's also many ways to look at that problem. That's more of a process view of what dreaming is, that the how of dreaming and not so much the what. I mean, people like Ernest Hartman, they spent time trying to figure out what kinds of contents we actually don't dream about. And he had a very famous paper come out showing that the 3 R's were very rarely dreamt about, reading, writing, and arithmetic. Those are things that, even though we do quite a lot in our daily lives, we tend to not dream about at all. Whereas on the other hand, there are many things that we do in daily life, such as interact with our families and friends and so forth, that are very frequent in dreams.
No, that's very important what Tore's just said about the idea of investigating what dreams are like on average. So this is before we try and work out particular contents caused on particular nights, is what are dreams like on average. And so you have findings, for example, that there may be a lot of belief that dreams are often bizarre. But actually, when you get people to record every dream they have, then you only get true bizarreness, things that are impossible in a dream about 10% of the time. So working out the averages for what's in dream content is a very important thing to do. So Tore's done work on how much do people smell or taste in dreams, and finding out that it's occasional, it's very rare, but it can actually happen. So those are important issues of what average dreams are like.
So if people don't dream about reading, writing, and arithmetic, and they don't often smell or taste, what do they do? So do people speak in their dreams, or is it more kind of emotional? Is it more just sequences of events that are happening? What kind of things happen in dreams in general?
Well, by the same token as Mark was mentioning, if you look at the sensory attributes of dreams, visual contents are almost ubiquitous. Most dreams are visual, and a grand majority are auditory as well. So there is speaking, there is sound, and so forth. Those are the two predominant senses. There's also a lot of movement and action occurring. But when it comes to the self and what the self is doing in dreams, we have a bit of a methodological problem, because dreamers tend to not talk about necessarily what's going on in their sort of personal spaces when they're dreaming. For example, if you have objective judges look at dreams, an average sample of dreams, 3% of the time they'll find that the self is represented in the dream in some specific way. Whereas if you ask subjects, about their self presence in the dream, it'll be 100% of the time. These are simple, taken for granted qualities that are often overlooked when people report the dreams. And I'd argue there are many kinds of attributes like that are present in dreams that are just simply almost never reported because our subjects are naive introspectors. They talk about their dreams in maybe a socially acceptable way or an expected way. And that means very often in an audio-visual way, because it's the way we talk about movies and we talk about our life experience. And they may miss a more subtle level, which has to do with bodily experience and sort of the subtler senses.
There's another one of those which Tore, I'm sure, knows about as well, which is that metacognition is often not reported when people give a dream report. So the idea of choosing to do something in a dream or having a conversation with oneself during the dream as part of, say, a decision-making process or thwarted intention. These are often things which are missed out of the dream report, and you actually have to ask somebody, right, I know you've given an account of what you've done and everything, the whole stream of the plot of the dream, but were there any choices? And so these, again, are things where there is a balance between getting a naive dream report in some instances and in other instances actually having to ask the person, have you had a taste? Have you had a choice? That type of data is sometimes missing from the naive reports.
That's right. It's true. Our subjects often tend to storify their reports to make it coherent, but they're not necessarily good novelists in that they leave out a lot of the subtle detail, which tends to really entrap readers into a good novel, which has to do very much with the personal reactions to events. How were you feeling? What were you thinking about what just happened there? And even more basic than that, I think what we're missing out on is the whole sort of pseudo-perceptual aspect of dreams. That is, not just that we're seeing and hearing things, but that we're looking for things, we're listening for things, we're actively searching out information. This is what is the basis of reality during wakefulness, is the active nature of our perceptual systems. And I tend to believe that the same thing is going on in dreams. We are using our perceptual system in this active way. But that whole level of interaction with the world is really not reported unless you train people to report it. And we've done some of that and can uncover that layer, that phenomenological layer that is so interesting to me with respect to consciousness anyway.
So what you're both kind of saying here is that because largely you're studying dreams by getting people to write down descriptions of their dream, and then the experimenters later analyze those descriptions, some things are getting lost in translation because either people don't write everything down because they might not think it's important, like they might not write down about the smells or the tastes or things like that, or else the experimenters maybe don't pick up on all of the description somehow that's there. And so you might need to train the dreamers to describe their dreams more fully and capture more detail somehow so that it's not missed. That's your point, right?
Yes, or use targeted probes to ask for the specific things that you're interested in. But you're right. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, then a lengthy video like a dream, how many words would that equal? It's almost infinite. So yes, there's so much information to be gathered.
But one of the things that does seem to come up a lot in dreams is emotions. So I wonder if we can talk a bit about that. Do emotions occur in all dreams? Is it all emotions? Is it anything to do with what we're feeling when we're awake? What do you think?
There was some classic studies that Fossey has done on this, and some other people as well, in which they've either got people's dreams from the sleep lab or they've woken them up at home with a computer attached to a device that spots whether they're in REM sleep or not, or alternatively getting reports of people's dreams, yes, from home or in the sleep lab. And what seemed to be occurring then was that about a third of the time there was no emotion at all. And I think it was about Tore maybe had to correct me on this, but it was that about a third of the time there were positive emotions and about a third of the time negative emotions. And one of the oddities is that joy seemed to be the most frequent one, with more negative emotions coming in second place for all of that. So it seemed to be about 2/3 of dreams having some emotion going on in them.
Those proportions are exactly overlap what we found in one of our studies. We found that subjects themselves in the lab would report a third of the time positive emotions, a third of the time negative, and a third of the time neutral or no emotions, I guess. But the estimates really vary quite a lot from study to study. Our first study that I did with Danielle Delaurier, we had people keep records at home of their dreams, and we gave them extensive lexicons of almost 200 words that they could use to describe their emotions. And in that case, we found that virtually all dreams had emotions. Every scene of every dream contains some emotions if you ask people to go in and rate them. Now, that might be an artifact of our method. We're forcing people to focus too much on emotions, but it's such a private experience as well. So when judges do the scoring, the rates are much lower. And yes, as Mark said, judges miss out on all the positive emotion that seem to be in dreams. If you ask subjects themselves, they will give you much higher percentages of positive emotions. It's a good example of this phenomenological problem of what's missing from a dream report.
And of course, what's important there is to work out if there are instances where in waking life one would expect an emotion, but in the dream there actually wasn't. And so although it's possible that sometimes what we've got is people failing to report an emotion or a judge missing that an emotion was actually there, we may actually have for some dreams the case that an emotion, we would expect it to be there, but the person, if probed, may actually say, no, I didn't feel anything, or I didn't feel that. I was running away from the lion, but I was not fearful. So those are important as well, that we may have instances where the emotion is incongruent with the environment.
Oh, that's very interesting. So it feels like we have three different pieces here. We have this idea that you might have some dreams that are emotional and some that aren't. But then it might be that sometimes if you probe further, you will find emotion even in the supposedly non-emotional dreams if you ask the right questions. But likewise, you might find that some of the things that would be rated as emotional actually were not felt as emotional by the person having the dream. So it's complicated.
Yes, and you can add to that other subject differences as well. There are some people who are just notoriously bad at describing their own emotions. It's a problem of finding words to express your emotions known as alexithymia. And such people very often will not be able to describe the emotions in their dreams at all. So there's that whole problem to add to the mix.
And how does all of this map onto the different sleep stages? Because there is this kind of dogma, at least I remember teaching undergrads years ago that, REM dreams are the emotional ones and non-REM dreams are not. Does that hold up?
Well, I think it does, personally. For one reason, in non-REM sleep, you don't have the same degree of muscle paralysis and inhibition that you have in REM sleep, sort of the atonia of the whole muscular system. And so, emotion and the actions that accompany emotions in REM sleep, we know they're being inhibited by muscle atonia. Whereas in non-REM sleep, that inhibiting factor is not there. Yet we don't see people, leaping up from their non-REM dreams constantly because, they've been so frightened or they're so exalted or whatever. It really seems like during non-REM sleep, the level of cognitive activity is at it's a different level than emotional, sort of this inactive, expressive level. It has more to do with concept cognitions. That's my take.
So they're more logical in non-REM sleep and possibly more emotional in REM sleep.
I think that research bears that out as well. If you look at even the early research bears that out, that REM dreams are more emotional than non-REM dreams. Yes. I don't know. Would you disagree with that?
There is an additional issue there, though, which is that the non-REM dreams on average are shorter than REM dreams. And so there have been claims that the entire difference between REM dreams and non-REM dreams boils down to how long the dream reports are. And so if there's more emotion in REM dream reports, it may be that, per line or per 20 words or whatever, there's the same amount in non-REM dream reports as there are in REM dream reports. And so this then comes to a big methodological dispute that's still going on about to what extent do we have to take account of the fact that the non-REM dreams may simply be shorter and actually not differ in any qualitative sense from the REM dreams. Now, the people who believe that the REM dreams are different and they are a fuller type of dream, their response to that is to say, well, if you've got all these emotions in a REM dream, you're going to need lots of words to describe it. And so it's unfair to control for the length of the dream reports. Saying that short REM dream reports are very similar to short non-REM dream reports and they have a similar level of emotion is to those people an unfair comparison, because they'll say, no, but most REM dreams are longer and they're full of emotion, and you may need the words to describe the emotions and the plot and everything. So when it comes to comparing REM and non-REM dreams, there is a bit of a debate going on about the extent to which it's simply a level of how long those dreams are. But it might not be. There may be these qualitative differences.
Yes, that's right. There are a certain number of studies that have tried to control for those length factors, for example, by comparing REM dreams and non-REM dreams of the same length, and for whatever qualities that they'd be of interest. And a certain number of those qualities still stand out as unique to REM sleep. And emotion is one of those. Once you've done these controls for length, visual vividness may be another, but it is a miasma of a problem. And there's also the argument that emotions, they derive from the content, and it takes more content for an emotion to sort of build up to a level that you can detect it. So shorter dreams would have less emotion, and there's some evidence of that too, that it takes time.
Is there any work on autonomic responses during dreams? This is something that I've been curious about for a while, because people often talk about how in REM sleep, you can't have autonomic responses because a neurotransmitter called norepinephrine is at very low levels, and that's important for mediating these responses. I'm talking about things like your heart rate kind of increasing, your palms sweating, these kind of bodily responses that are markers of emotion. Do you know if people have these during their emotional REM dreams or non-REM dreams?
Yeah, some of the earliest work looked at that, actually. I think Alan Hobson's doctoral thesis looked at what was a respiratory variability in relation to dream content, and found that there was an association. I couldn't name any number of other studies. I'm sure they're out there, though. But I think in general, it is true that the more emotional the dream, the more variable the autonomic responses in REM sleep are. I think that's been studied several times.
Yeah, and I think there were early reports in the 60s that the greater the level of breathing irregularity, then the more likely the person was to have a dream that they recalled. So it was as if the irregularity was in a way caused by the dream, or was part of a dream occurring.
So perhaps this idea about not having these bodily responses in REM is either incorrect or it's limited in that it doesn't include responses during dreaming time in REM.
Well, right. It's a bit of a sticky problem, as Mark alluded to earlier, because one phenomenon that I think most dream researchers are aware of is the fact that when you bring people into the lab and you try to measure the physiological responses, they're changed in this odd way. Like, for example, nightmare subjects, if you bring them into the lab, they will not generally have nightmares in the lab. And there seems to be some inhibitory process at work, whether it's, being observed by the cameras on the walls, or just feeling secure because you're in some kind of a medical type facility. But these dreams don't often occur. And even when they do occur, we notice that in a high proportion of cases, there is this absence of emotion that Mark was referring to, when you would expect it, when a judge would say, well, that looks like a nightmare to me, but the person will be strangely cold to the emotional level of the dream, or of the nightmare, if you want to call it that. So there is something going on in the lab about being observed that I think, has been an impediment for a long time to getting an accurate gauge of the relationship between sort of the autonomic level and the phenomenological level.
Yeah, that does make it very tricky. Now, as you mentioned nightmares, I know that you've both done quite a lot of work on nightmares. And Tore, I know you have a neurocognitive model of nightmares. Could you tell us about that?
Which one? I have 7 different theories.
Your favorite?
Well, actually, my favorite is the stress acceleration hypothesis of nightmares. But no, the one you're referring to is a model designed to try to explain a function a possible function of nightmares, or of dreaming more generally, and that is to facilitate extinction of fear, because fear is the most predominant emotion in nightmares. And the idea is that somehow the way dreaming is putting together the scenes and the actions is helping us to overcome memories of fear. Now, memories of fear are very easily learned. We can learn to fear something in a single experience, right? You're mugged by a gang of thugs in a public washroom, let's say, and you're going to be traumatized by that, and your dreams are going to be affected by it. And you may have, from that point on, a fear of gangs of people, of public washrooms, of whatever the context you were in. So we need to unlearn fear just as readily as we learn it, and we do generally unlearn phobias and things like that, except in pathological cases. So the idea is that the dream is helping a person unlearn a fear that has been learned, and it does that by modifying, almost at random, the context within which these fears are brought up. So the model claims that there is a mechanism for bringing up fear. That is, we have to be able to actually scare ourselves while we're dreaming, and then to also add to the mix safety components, which will counteract the fears that are brought up. So it's a two-sided process, bringing up the fear and then bringing in the safety elements and kind of randomly mixing them together so as to produce extinction. And extinction is understood as a classical learning sense. The mechanisms are quite well understood, and my claim is just that this is what's happening normally in dreaming, and even in some nightmares, there's an attempt to bring forth safety components to greater or lesser degrees of success. And when they fail, the person wakes up in a panic. But very often we see nightmares in which the person does do something or see something that actually turns around the scenario. They confront the aggressor or whatever, and they experience relief. The entire process is encapsulated within the nightmare.
Oh, I see. So I was going to ask how experiencing the fear in the nightmare could lead to extinction, but I think you've answered that. So what you're saying is that they experience the fear and then a safety component occurs, which is either they do something about it or the aggressor, the fearful thing turns out not to be as bad as they thought it was. And so through that's a kind of cathartic experience that then would allow them to be less afraid afterwards.
Right. That would be an exemplary case where it all happens within one dream. But I think it's more likely that it's an incremental process where maybe some subtle aspect of the context changes. So the fear is just a little less intense. And then in a later dream or later nightmare, it occurs again. But another change has occurred, and it's incrementally reducing the level of fear.
It's a really interesting model. Mark, do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, it's a terrific model, and Tore has gathered together vast amounts of evidence for it from neuroscience and from behavioural work and from the sort of clinical side where these types of phobias are produced, and it's enormous as a theory. So it's really great.
Feel free to be skeptical, Mark.
It's only going to throw up the issue which Tore knows as well, and this is throughout dream research. And it's been throughout dream research for many decades, is that almost no matter what you can find as to the characteristics of the dreams, for example, that people who are in stressful circumstances have more nightmares, various relationships between waking life and dream content occur. And the perennial problem all along is that it is possible to devise very interesting theories which can make predictions to test them. But one of the issues that then arises is for all of these theories, what could be occurring is we're simply dreaming of our fears. Or to take another example, there's a threat simulation theory which holds that the dreams are a sort of virtual reality in which you practice overcoming threats. And that is explaining the presence of threats in dreams, that the threats have that purpose. And for all of these theories, and there are very, very many of them, the theories may very well be plausible, and they may very well be true. But one of the problems that arises is it may very well be that we simply dream of threats and we're not dreaming for any purpose, or we simply dream of fears and there may not actually be any purpose to it. or function to it. But Tore knows this. It's true for all dream theories at the moment that until we can be in a situation that we can experimentally manipulate the content of dreams so that we can, by random allocation to groups, undertake a normal psychology experiment to see what would happen if this person had a fear memory in their dreams versus this other person who doesn't, then we can start to work out the effect of the dreams. But at the moment, we're at a correlational situation where the content of the dreams may be caused by waking life variables rather than being there with the function of altering those variables. To put forward the pro-function view, we do know that we're having all these thoughts and images and actions and behaviours and everything during our sleep. And so the argument in favour of there, say, being a fear reduction function is that if we're having those experiences, we will probably learn from them. And so that's the point in favour of Tore's theory, that whenever you have experiences going together in waking life, that causes learning. And so it is possible that our dreams have the same characteristic, that if we dream of a fear and we tie it in with something nice happening, that will diminish the fear. So it may very well be that it's up to the people who don't believe there's a function to say, well, why should there be something different about these experiences during our sleep? Maybe these experiences, we can learn from them just as much as we learn from our experiences when we're awake.
And then one question comes up, which is whether we need to be conscious of and have a memory access to that experience. That is, do we need to remember this experience in order to learn from it? And my model, I guess, is aimed at a function that would work whether or not the person is conscious of it. But of course, to the extent that you remember your dreams and you react to them, you may be benefiting secondarily, let's say.
So I think it's worth going a little deeper into this because it's such an important model. So, Mark, you said that there's clinical evidence as well as lots of other kinds of evidence. Tore, would you be able to tell us a little bit about some of that work, just in terms of, I mean, presumably, if you found evidence supporting this model, then it does show that after people have these dreams, they are less fearful. And so there is some kind of relationship between the nightmares and a reduction in subsequent fear. Is that right?
Well, I would say that there's sketchy evidence so far. There's a lot of problems, as Mark alluded to, with actually demonstrating empirically causal relationship between, say, changes in the emotional state and, the features of a dream. There are a number of studies that you could throw together that show that a change in feeling from the evening to the morning is related to aspects of dreaming, say the negativity of a dream content. It might be correlated with a decrease in or an increase in negativity in the morning relative to the evening. And there's a few studies trying to get at that. We tried that as well. We even tried to deprive people of REM sleep in order to interfere with that process. And in fact, we found actually just the opposite of what we predicted. So we expected that disrupting REM sleep would lead to people having an increase in their negativity responses to these negative slides that we show in the evening and the morning. And in fact, disrupting REM sleep led to a decrease in their negativity responses. So it seemed like depriving people of REM sleep actually had an adaptive value if you define adaptation by being less negative in the morning. So we've tried to get at that, but it's tricky because it's entirely possible that the changes that we'll see are entirely due to some aspect of REM sleep and not necessarily the dream content. So you need to look at the dream content and the REM sleep parameters both as a function of these changes to emotion. And I think the bottom line is that it's almost impossible to separate those two. It could very well be that the emotion regulation function has something to do with the processes of REM sleep, and that the emotional reactions in the dream are just sort of epiphenomenal, that they come along for the ride, but they're not really necessary. And the only way you could prove that they're necessary is that you somehow activate a negative dream experimentally during sleep. And we don't really have the technology to do that. Well, maybe we're getting close with this sort of targeted memory reactivation. it may be possible to. Ethically, is it feasible? I don't know. We go around, stimulating nightmares in our subjects just in order to test certain hypotheses.
One point in favour of what Tore's just been saying, that there may be a function of dreaming, is that when it comes to this emotion processing, it may very well be that we need the dream to occur for the full processing to occur. And so whereas Tore has just said there's a skeptical view which says, well, maybe it's the REM sleep processing that's having this function. Well, maybe actually we do need to have the dream to fully process the emotions. And so the dreams could be turned on and off during the night when a particular level of processing is needed. And that would fit with ideas that maybe consciousness in waking life ought really to have a function, because it's very difficult to see why it would be there otherwise. And maybe it's in order to properly have emotions. And maybe the dream consciousness is very similar to that. It's a sort of a pinnacle of processing. That just answers the skeptical point that whatever's going on is just caused by the REM sleep. But no, maybe the dream content is necessary there.
I mean, there certainly seems to be something very complicated going on in REM sleep with respect to emotions, doesn't there? There are lots of different bits of evidence kind of pointing in opposing directions, as far as I'm aware. So, I mean, certainly REM is increased in depression, and antidepressants tend to decrease REM, and that seems to be beneficial. And then, on the other hand, there's this sleep to remember, sleep to forget hypothesis from Matt Walker, which actually feels quite similar to your neurocognitive model, Tore, except that it's not about dreams. It's just about the idea of replaying negative or emotionally loaded memories in REM, and how replaying those memories, re-experiencing them, even if you're not aware of them, if they don't come into dreams, could lead to a decoupling of the emotions from the memories. I'm actually wondering if some of those ideas might have come from your model. I don't know. We'd have to ask Matt about that.
Well, it's true. His model in many ways is similar, and he's a little bit cagey about the role of dreaming. He does bring up dreaming once or twice, but I think at root the mechanisms are quite similar. It's the dissociating of the affect from the memory, which is critical, either for treating nightmares or just from preventing an overload of emotional memories. So I tend to think that they're similar. And in fact, one of our studies actually supported his model more than it supported any other model that we could find. That was kind of unexpected. But still, the evidence is still, I think, very circumstantial and correlational to the present.
One of our studies actually also supports his model, and I'm wondering if it might support yours, and it fits with what we've just been saying. So what we did was use targeted memory reactivation. That's pairing sounds with nasty pictures learned in wake and representing those during REM sleep, just the sounds, triggering the memory of the pictures. And we found that if we did that, then people rated those pictures as less upsetting the next day than if we didn't reactivate them, or if we reactivated them in non-REM sleep. And just kind of trying to link back through elements of what we've talked about, that it's triggering a memory for something unpleasant in REM. And it's not triggering a dream. Well, we didn't collect dream reports, unfortunately, but it could be that there is a dream there, or it could be that the replay is just not quite strong enough to emerge into consciousness as a dream in the way that Mark was talking about, as a kind of a tip of the iceberg phenomena poking up. But if we'd done it more strongly, they might have had dreams about that. So to me, these elements all kind of fit together. The triggering, the reactivation of something that might be dreamlike might lead to this decoupling and reduction in emotion the next day. Does that work for you?
I love it. In fact, I had forgotten about that study that you did when I mentioned the TMR approach, but that is pretty close to what I think would be needed for an empirical demonstration, for an experimental intervention, stimulating something that's associated with nightmarish imagery during REM sleep. But it sounds like from your results, well, you didn't collect dream content, so that's a problem. But yes, I agree. We need to collect the dreams, but it sounds like there's a kind of an exposure effect occurring, a mere exposure. So the more people perceive the same stimulus, the more positive they are toward that stimulus.
Yeah, it might be helpful if Tore reminded me of who did this study, but it was a study just done by, I don't know whether it was Seymour's group, but they had presented pictures to people in the evening and then in the morning. And the ones who had less emotional reaction to negative pictures in the morning were the people who at other times were having more nightmares. I mean, for example, the finding that responsivity and reactance to emotional pictures in the morning after you've been shown them the evening before is lower for people who are in general having nightmares. And so there is the possibility there that the nightmares have altered the reactivity to emotions. But of course, the problem is, again, Tore mentioned that it's a correlational study like so many others. And it may just be that the people who react less in the morning are somehow people who are having more nightmares during the night. So it's a correlational finding rather than an experimental finding.
Right. And in that study, I believe that the nightmares were not occurring between the two times of measurement. So we don't really know what the dream content was of those nightmare sufferers. So it could actually be that they were having less intense emotional dreams that night, as our study would suggest would happen, because in our study, the people had the least negativity in their dreams. They showed sort of the greatest decrease in the morning, which is sort of the opposite of what you might expect from throwing the word nightmare out there. But people with nightmares, I think their dream content is much more variable. I think, as I mentioned, when they come into the lab, they seem to inhibit their nightmares. So it's very possible that they could have extreme non-feeling dreams and extreme feeling dreams more frequently than your sort of a healthy person. We don't know this, but
Yes. And that idea that the nightmare sufferers may have more positive dreams as well as these more negative dreams, Tore predicted that in your differential susceptibility framework, which is another one of the theories, which you did with Michelle Carr.
Well, I wouldn't claim ownership of that theory. I really would give kudos to Michelle for coming up with the basic ideas, and I helped her put it together and write it up. And so,
oh, that's great. Well, Michelle, and also with you, have the theory that people who are high on sensory processing sensitivity, who are people who are very easily overwhelmed with stimuli, they can be quite philosophically minded because they analyze things a lot. They're really quite cautious. They jump when there's noises. That's one of the interesting things. One of the very interesting part of the highly sensitive person scale, which measures whether people are these highly sensitive persons or less sensitive persons. And neither is good or bad. The humanity, as well as other species, need some members of the species who are less cautious and other ones who are more cautious and have a higher level of cognition needed before they act. And so Michelle and Tore's theory was that the people who are high on this highly sensitive person scale would, if they were in bad circumstances, be more likely to have nightmares. But the corollary is if they're in good circumstances, they may very well have good dreams, even more than other people. And in a paper that Michelle has written while she was here at Swansea, she did get the empirical support for that. So, or at least got the empirical support that the highly sensitive persons, they're more likely to react to stress by having nightmares than are less sensitive people. So that was a very terrific theory.
So basically, people who are highly sensitive are likely to have emotional dreams, both positive and negative, and they also tend to react to stress by having nightmares.
Yes, the positive side, the positive dreams hasn't been tested yet, as far as I know. We're trying to get that done here at Swansea, but certainly for the nightmare side of it, there's the whole theory that Michelle Carr and Tore put together, which now seems to be supported.
Right. The basis for that idea is sort of anecdotal, but people with frequent nightmares are often very creative individuals, and they often do report many other kinds of positive dreams, like lucid dreams or flying dreams, that kind of experience. So the susceptibility notion would explain both the positive and the negative side of sort of this dream experience.
Oh, well, it's going to be interesting to see if, Mark, you can support the positive side of that hypothesis.
Yes.
I think it's a wonderful place to stop. Thank you both so much. You've been listening to the Sleep Science Podcast with me, Penny Lewis. My guests today were Professor Tore Nielsen from the University of Montreal and Professor Mark Blagrove from Swansea University. Join us next time for part 2 of this episode, in which we continue our conversation about dreams and sleep. Our producer today was Sophie Smith. If you've enjoyed this show, please consider subscribing to the podcast or liking us on Twitter. We're planning a Q&A session for the last episode of this series, so if you have questions about this episode or anything else sleep-related, please send them to us on Twitter at #SleepSciencePodcastQ&A. If you'd like to hear other podcasts about sleep, please check out The Blunt Report, which has recently released a whole series on sleep, including an episode on the curious case of fatal familial insomnia. The Blunt Report aims to create interest in the world around us in a relaxed way that's easy to follow. Host Connor Blunt has spoken to some fascinating people, and it's well worth a listen. The Blunt Report is available on all platforms and even has a video podcast on YouTube. Thanks for listening, and until next time, sleep well.